Welcome to the Future of Less Work, where we explore how work is transforming one conversation at a time. I'm Nirit Cohen, and today I'm excited to unpack one of the most widely followed annual research projects on the changing world of work. Deloitte's 2026 Global Human Capital Trends Report released this week. I've been reading this report for years because it does something that I think is incredibly valuable. It gives names to emerging phenomena that organizations are experiencing but don't yet fully understand. And once something has a name, we can study it, measure it, and actually do something about it. One of the concepts in this year's report that immediately caught my attention is called culture debt. And I even wrote about it in this week's Forbes column. The idea is simple but powerful. When organizations push transformation and productivity, but ignore the cultural consequences, they accumulate hidden costs that compound over time. But culture debt is just one of a piece of a much bigger story. So today I wanted to unpack the biggest insights from the report and what they mean for leaders trying to navigate this moment. Joining me to do that is David Mallon, Head of Research and Chief Futurist for Deloitte's Human Capital in the US. And he's one of the leaders behind the research. David, welcome to Future of Less Work.
Thank you very much for having me. I obviously love talking about this topic, and I appreciate digging into culture debt too. I'm sure we'll talk about it.
Oh yeah, I'd love that. But actually, let's start with the big picture. So,
Sure.
We've gone through technology waves before: automation, digitization, internet, cloud computing. From your perspective, what makes this moment different from past technology shifts?
Well, I would sort of say two things. First off, the technology itself, I think, is where you would begin. AI is, first off, general purpose. So you use those words to mean things like the advent of the personal computer, electricity, even going way back when, predates all of us, steam. Like these are, I think, and especially in the business world, we have this sense that, oh, this is just yet more technology. We're used to technology. We're used to all this great new stuff coming into the world. And so we kind of expect it to work like that, when in reality, not many of us remember what it was like when we were first introducing the internet, or first introducing the personal computer or electricity or onward, and not remembering that in those moments, it was less and less about the specific individual use cases, proofs of concept, pilots, et cetera. And it was about just everything changing, but also at a time horizon that was, usually generational. It usually took a long time to kind of get used to it. Even think about like these things, right? Which is probably the last one that fits the smartphone that fits that definition. How long did it take organizations before, you were not just still using your personal mobile device at work? How long did it take organizations to kind of figure out, oh, wait a minute, these are going to be helpful for us too. We're going to need to change the work, change how we think about the work, et cetera. That's the trick here, is that we're looking at this in the wrong time horizons.
Yeah. So at the risk of dating myself, right, I actually do remember that internet came in. I actually do remember Windows came in, right? And And I still think that this feels even more of a disruption, because when the internet came in, I could suddenly do things, right? I mean, instead of a fax machine, right, I could send email. But it wasn't just, it was changing how it was tools in my ability to do my work, but I'm not sure it was changing the essence of the work so much. And
That's
mobile
right.
technology, I think, was slightly similar, right? We could suddenly disconnect from our desks and from, work on the go and use the screens to get to our data. But still, it was our work, my job, my data. This feels different.
Yes. And you have teed up the second thing that's really different about this moment. Yes, AI is a general purpose technology like those others, but it is different from them fundamentally because it talks back. It can evolve. It can, we can teach it to do a lot of the things that we thought only humans can do. So when you think about humanity, what defines a human, think about sort of how biologists or anthropologists talk about it. And one of the key notions is using tools, right? That is one of the things that we do, and some other near relatives to us in the animal tree. We'll so use tools. That is, for as long as humanity has been around, it's been about, well, how do we use technology? And usually over the course of that entire history, it's been for one of two reasons. We are using technology to figure out how to do some things that we don't want to do or can do, or do them in different, new and different and faster ways. Substitution, to use a word. Or we're trying to use technologies to augment what we do, to help humans go further faster, to extend us, right? That notion of augmentation. With AI, we've reached a place where we can do something else entirely, which is the combinations of people and technologies to create entirely new kinds of values, to create greater potentials, to not just cut costs, not just go faster, but to do entirely new and different things in new ways.
So this is actually a great point to start, because some people are either talking about or acting according to this logic that if this machine replaces our thinking minds, right? So basically not just the working hands that we used to replace with machines, but actually analysis and writing and coding. And some people might actually say that words, the use of language is how we differentiate ourselves from everybody else on the planet, or everything else on the planet. And suddenly you've got this machine that can talk, right? And therefore maybe it's replacing us as opposed to working with us.
Sure. And that is, I think, let's what would say, it's a false trap. It is, and it's also it's not sustainable. So you see already examples of this happening where it's very easy to try to make the return about efficiency, about cutting costs. But there's great data, economists poking on this question that are helping us to understand that at a big picture, it is really going to be those, and this has been true in each of these past kind of big technology waves, it's going to be the long-term, intangible, new kinds of values that are possible that are ultimately the reason for all of this, that are ultimately why we would want to go down this path in the first place, that are going to make it truly the transformative moment that it is. In the meantime, just focusing on costs, whether that's at the level of just trying to fix one particular kind of work or transform one function, or what might happen at an organizational level, is just a path to actually, in many ways, slowing down those long-term benefits versus not. One economist basically said, kind of pulling back the camera, most organizations are going to end up needing to spend $9 on the human element for every $1 they spend on the technology. And that's in service of these sort of broader benefits, right? But that's not how we think about it in most organizations today. We're thinking about it in smaller chunks. We want to fix this problem. We want to transform this function. We want to save some money here. And ultimately, we think that's about replacing people. As you've read the report, we have the argument that actually everyone has access to these tools now. Everyone can take that path. The ones that are going to win, the ones that are going to be differentiated, are sort of realizing that it's actually the combinations of those things that people do, that we humans bring the purpose, the values, the pushing the first domino, the sort of the aspirations, the dreams. It's the combinations of that plus these technologies are actually, as we use, times these technologies that actually will be the source of differentiation. We call it sort of the human edge. And the companies that figure out how to scale and operationalize the intersections are the ones that will go further faster. You see it already in lots of the great case examples. There was this early, I think, conventional wisdom around generative AI that it would help the less experienced, less knowledgeable, less trained in a particular discipline.
Like you don't.
They would help them. They would help them catch up quickly. It was sort of a democratizing technology, but actually, as it's played out, it's actually turned out to be an amplifying technology, and it's in the hands of the already creative, the already expert, the already further down in a discipline. It's in their hands that the real magic seems to happen. But it's interesting, you have to teach the experts how to use it, because mostly they start off a little bit hands-offish. They're not quite sure how to use it. But once you do teach them how to use it, the distance they can put against everyone else is amazing, because it's an amplifier.
You've said so many things I want to pause on, but I have to ask you a question that's a slight tangent from what you just said. I agree, and I'm seeing this very clearly, right? That we see that the experienced people know how to use the tools, ask it, get to the kind of next level of understanding. How do we build experience? Because we have gotten here because we actually had our hands on the keyboard, right? And did the grunt work. And if we no longer do that and people just accept answers at face value, right, then it becomes non-interesting and you don't build experience.
So it's interesting you asked that question, because I know what prompted today's conversation is the 2026 version of our human capital trend study. In the 2025 version that just came out last year, right, we have a chapter on what we call the experience gap, which is exactly what you're getting at. Is that where is experience going to come from in organizations? The short answer I give to you is that we have to unpack what we mean by experience, because I think so much of some of the words we use in the world of business today are really proxies that we just never ask the question. We never bothered to unpack them because we don't need to. And so, when we go to hire people, we can say on a job rec that we need 3 to 5 years of experience. And it's interesting how now everybody asks for 3 to 5 years of experience, regardless of the job. There are no entry-level foothold roles anymore. And that's including 3 to 5 years of experience at things that didn't exist 5 years ago, which is kind of funny. But when we unpack what that really is, that's an organization, or more specifically a hiring manager, asking for, if you've worked somewhere else, I can make a bet that you've already developed the ability to express some judgment and develop a bit of wisdom about that work. So you have a certain set of skills, but it's not just that you have the skills, you know how to use them in different contexts. And I'm betting that you've been somewhere else before, so you know how to use them in different contexts, right? Well, what we're going to end up needing to realize is we're going to need to stop asking for that proxy and actually just look for skills used in context, look for judgment, and then to your point about how we develop it, figure out how to intentionally create that ability to adapt, that ability to express judgment, that ability to form wisdom. And it's not going to come from 5 years of tours of duty. It's going to come from you, in many ways, actually AI end up maybe part of the solution here too. There's great examples in last year's studies of companies trying to unpack the tacit learning that happens and put it into these tools. So you have coaches that, for example, help the less experienced handle certain situations. There's a case study about a technology company everybody's aware of, would know, that has a culture coach, which is really, they took decades worth of performance management data, scrubbed it to protect the innocent, and put it all into a coach to say, well, if you're trying to navigate how to handle a situation in our organization, ask the coach, because the coach is like decades worth of what gets rewarded around here, right?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a perfect segue to circle back to this year's report, because when we talk about, you said tacit knowledge, right? There's also, I was almost going to say, tacit human elements in the work, right? When I outsource or hand over, right, a presentation to a tool, an AI tool, I'm missing the process I go through as a human to think through the story I'm trying to tell when I'm crunching through building the presentation, right? And then we also have to figure out, and I think that was part of that idea of how do we combine, right, machines and humans. We have to figure out what's our job in this dance.
100%. One of the things that again, lots of emerging research on this topic. We're focused so much in organizations in the last little while about upskilling, trying to build fluency, just trying to get more of the organization to use these tools. I think we're kind of doing it backwards. We're focusing on questions of adoption when, like, I'm going to buy all these licenses for all these technology, and then I'm going to track who's using them. And I might use carrots and sticks to sort of force them to use them, which, as we talk about in the report, is kind of missing the forest for the trees. It's not whether they use an individual tool, it's what are they using it for and how is that changing the work? And how are you intentionally thinking about how the work should change? Because left to their own devices, organizations far too often are falling into this trap of, oh, let's just optimize. Let's create version 2 of something that is existing. And that's like missing most of the value, because if we now have the ability to do these things in very new and different ways, changing the game, essentially. There's a great case example we talked about last year of a furniture company people would all know that had the problem, so many do, of we want to cut costs in our call centers. We want our call centers to be more efficient, save some money. But rather than doing what most do, they brought AI in to do it. Rather than doing what most do, they, which is okay, we're going to bring AI in, we're going to automate a bunch of things, and we're going to let people go. Instead, we're going to bring AI in and automate some of the basic things, and we're going to retrain our call centers as interior designers. Rather than just the question being, how do I cut costs? The question became, how do I fundamentally transform the relationship I have with my customers? And that's everything at kind of the big picture level, what's going on. Now, to your point, dial it down to the individual level. And what we have to do is not just teach the tools of AI. There's this notion that gets talked about in the research of theory of mind. Almost nothing predicts more success at using generative AI tools as how well formed in your head do you have a sense of what the AI is, right? And if you think of it as your magic search engine, you're heading down a path to that direction of like what's now that fun term we now have, work slop. You're heading the direction of or actually most recently a study that came out in the last few weeks, cognitive surrender, which I just love that notion, cognitive surrender. You're just giving up your mental faculties to the tool. If you think of AI, if your theory of mind is that other is now your coach, your collaborator, even your sort of intentional adversary, your kind of gadfly, you're there to make you better, then you start off in a much, much different place. You're already going to create much more value out of your interaction with the tool. So it's on us as organizations to help everyone in the organization to think about that question. What is the AI to you? And it's not just going to be one role. There might be actually an entire library of possible roles that relationships to be had. That's one of the chapters in this report gets at this. And then being intentional about which relationships you're going into the interaction with that in your mind, and you'll get more value out of it.
And that's at an individual level, that is fabulous advice, right? You're basically saying, if you think of this tool as your teacher, your mentor, your adversary, your helper, your analyst, then you have a whole team at your disposal, right? And they get better and better. From an organization standpoint, it still feels like most organizations look at this through the lens of productivity. So they basically say, I used to have 10 people doing this. I want to have one person do this in 10, tools. And they might let the 9 people go, or they might keep the 10 and say, I'm going to do, 10x of what I used to do. Still a lens of productivity versus redesigning what's possible and separating that human and tool relationship so that each one does what it's best at. And then I think you talk about that coordination, right? Or orchestration probably is the better term.
Yeah. So I think we have to be, I think, open. We have to be realistic about this question, which is to say, organizations do exist to, especially if it's a public company, let's say, they exist to create a return for their investors. That's not going to change. And that means that they're always going to try to look for an edge. They're always going to try to look for a way to maximize value, to get the most value out of the least input, right? And that is efficiency. That's productivity as an economist would fundamentally define it. And that's not going to go anywhere. And yes, you would expect to see that's going to cause changes in the size and shapes of organizations now, and sort of who does what and so forth. You could expect to see that, but to the way that you phrased it, I think you're kind of headed in the right direction, which is You could choose to try to do what you currently do with it currently takes you 10 people, and you could try to do the same thing with one, and maybe that's enough. But I think our point of view, expressed in this research and other, is that if that particular point of view is a recipe for just being left behind. The real value is going to come for those organizations that begin to think, well, rather than just trying to do what I currently do with one, what's the 100-fold things that we could do that we're not even thinking about yet? If we can expand the horizons of the people that we have, if we can use these tools use the humans times machines in new and different ways, design for that interaction, bring the creativity and the empathy that the humans bring scaled because of the AI's ability to swarm and go and just work without tiring in whatever field we're covering, right? And so that second piece that you started to poke on, take the 10 people you have and do 1,000 times the work, right? In solving for bigger, broader problems and then some.
So what needs to change from how we manage people? And I don't know if it's the organizational structure, it's the way we get people, driven and connected to their work. But what do you think needs to change?
Well, I mean, one of the things is getting just better at thinking in outcomes, thinking, being cognizant of the outcomes we're trying to accomplish, whether that's on the ground at a particular piece of work, a particular setup, coffee shop, factory, what have you, to all the way to the organizational level, to the business outcomes that organizations are always going to care about, profit and cost and growth, but also those top line human outcomes like well-being and sort of viability and personal, the personal growth. So, but if we think in those outcomes, when we go to think, okay, we're going to bring AI into our organization and we're going to use it to improve what we do in this part of the organization, this function or that. And if we have a clear notion of those outcomes, we're not caught up in how we do it today, but how could we do it? How could we do it better? What could we be doing more here? You're already started down the right path. You're already kind of opening your horizons. Your imagination can take you in different directions. So just thinking that way is a good start. I think, to repeat something I was getting at earlier, I also think we just need to stop thinking about this as yet another piece of technology we're just dropping in your organization to make ourselves better. It is more than that. And so just so that kind of incrementalist mindset, avoiding that process trap, those are two starts.
Yeah. And I think the economy does that, right? Because you always have the newcomers who see what's possible and they're not burdened by the past. Was there something in the data that surprised you?
So sort of diving into a couple of the chapters, I think the degree to which I'll highlight one that you were highlighting in what you're writing about, degree to which culture came out so clearly in this year's study. I don't think we were looking for that when we started. But yet it's not if you've read that chapter, it's not what people might think. It's not a chapter about why culture is holding you back. It's a chapter about if you get too far out in front of your culture, things can go in unexpected directions. Right?
Yeah, and to me, what was fascinating about this culture debt concept, and you're right, it was actually the idea that you might not be noticing that something's changing with your culture because all these little changes are happening, but they're accumulating to do something with decision making and governance and what matters and your criteria.
I have 2 teenagers, and I'm seeing it happen in schools right now, of just a fundamental question that we as society are going to have to answer, and companies have to answer it now because they have performance management processes. We have to decide who gets promoted, who gets rewarded. So what is cheating? What's hard work? What is who's going to get rewarded? The person who works 60 hours or the person who works 30 hours, but accomplishes twice the value because they know how to use all these technologies, right?
Yeah. And also what happens when you figure out, so if I'm honest that I've done this in 30 hours because I've taught myself to be really good, but you end up giving me triple the work and I don't maybe get some of that back to go do other things that matter to me.
That's right.
Some of them being learning, right?
Yes.
Then I might not tell you.
That's right. And so there's all these weird little kind of scruples questions that are building up around what each of us brings, where does my value stop and the AI's value start? That companies, I just don't even think they think that this is something you have to worry about. And it is absolutely. And the more that you don't pay attention to it, the more that it sneaks up on you. And actually what happens, the more that people just start to figure it out for themselves in a vacuum. And they may not necessarily answer those questions in the way that the organization thought or would want in the context who they thought they were, what they valued, et cetera. So that one I think surprised us. I think the other one was the chapter on decisions. I think we knew that there were issues with decision making in organizations. That's something I personally have studied for a long time. We knew that most organizations assume the skills around decisions. They don't really explicitly teach them. And that's a challenge. But combine that with the tools of AI that are already in use. The fact that 2/3 of executives admitted that they are already using AI every day to augment or inform a decision, but half of them admit that they don't bother to verify the quality of the AI in outputs themselves. And that's just who said yes in a survey. There's all sorts of as I'm a researcher, there's social desirability baked into that. So you'd imagine actually the answers to both those questions are not there's probably even people who weren't necessarily admitting to what's going on.
And there's even awareness, right? Sometimes you think you checked, but what you didn't check was the underlying assumptions.
That's right.
Or, some other, that goes back to expertise and what we're taught about in terms of thinking and questioning.
I mean, we called that part of that chapter running with scissors, and it is absolutely running with scissors. And I think on some level, it's not that I would say people should slow down. I think what we're saying in the chapter too is that as an individual or as an organization, don't slow down, but actually just stop and turn this into the discipline that it is. Like, think about where and how you can create better connections between choice and chooser. Whether you use AI or not, it will serve you well.
Yeah. Okay. Fabulous. So I don't know if we've talked about this, but I really wanted to ask you if somebody listening to us, right, as a leader, wants to take this one most significant insight from this report to make sure that the strengths show up, whether it's in their leadership or as the organization. What would you have them focus on?
Well, I think it's something we've already talked about, which is the very first of the trends in the report this year on this designing for the interaction of people and AI, of humans and machines. Our opinion, our point of view, both in this report and other, is this is the defining discipline of business for the next little while, is that we figure this out, we get this right. It is likely something that most organizations are only just barely thinking about, if at all. And it is everything. And even just down to what we said.
Say more what you mean by that, because I've read this and I know, but I will say that when I saw the title, we think of human and technology interface and design as something slightly different. So say more about what you mean by that.
Well, part of it is what I was talking about before with this notion of theory of mind. That's one aspect of this, is that wherever we're using these technologies, are we thinking about what we think is the best or right relationship to have with the AI? Are we designing for that? You mentioned UX UI design. I think that's a great start. Some organizations have many have experts in the organization who are used to thinking that way. They are UX designers. But what's changing is interface up till now has meant a screen, has meant the PC screen, the mobile devices screen. Now interface means just work. It means the workplace. It means all that's happening. So take that same mindset of designers who think about, why put a button here? Why do I need people to click here? What's the feedback loop? How do I let them know that what they did was useful? Or how do I give them feedback to let them know that an error has happened or something's wrong? That design mindset needs to get brought now to the workplace and how we all use all these tools. And it is how you're ultimately going to get the full value of all this investment that you're having in these technologies, is that you are thinking this way. So many companies these days are starting to experiment with this notion of the forward deployed engineer, which is really just taking a technologist who knows how AI works and bringing them outside of like an IT function and putting them in the organization so that they are watching and they can figure out how in the moment to bring the technologies to life in the work. Our point of view is, yeah, that's great. You need that. But you also need the sort of forward deployed human capitalist. You need somebody who knows how people work and how you can, change them, optimize them, grow them, make them, help them work with the technologies. So when you have those forward deployed engineers, why don't you have a forward deployed human expert next to them, and that let the two of them work together into thinking about how the work's going to change, why you want to do a certain way, where is this going to go, what are the possibilities, right? That's that chapter focusing on just building up a muscle around this. If there was nothing else in the report, pay attention to that, because again, rolling back to this notion of your human edge, that is where you are going to win in whatever context that means to your organization, is to put that kind of expertise together.
Yep. Fabulous. So I always wrap these conversations with a question for a question. What do you think is the one question we should all be asking about the future of work these days?
I'll give you something. One of the things that I like to do, even with my own teams or with the clients I work with, what have you, is just to remind them this is a moment where it all feels a little bit science fiction, and it's not. But science fiction can help us. So think about, whether it's movies or books or whatever, think about the various futures that have already been painted around, the intersections of people and AI, robots, etc. Which one do you want? Right? Which of those various futures would you like to be growing towards? Yeah, obviously most science fiction tends to have a lot of dystopian, but there's also utopian versions too. Which do you want? Because we are making choices right now in organizations that we may think we're just solving it for us or our little team or our company or our part of the world, and we're not. We are collectively making decisions that are actively picking which of those movies do you actually want to be the future. So that's the question everybody should be thinking about. Which movie are we working on right now?
Fabulous. Wonderful. Wow, David, thank you for joining me today and for helping us unpack the insights from the 2026 Deloitte Global Human Capital Trends Report. For more about David Mallon and the research we discussed, check out the links in the podcast description. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow The Future of Less Work wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, the new social contract is a win-win between people, organizations, and your best people do not work because you tell them to, or because you measure them on it, or because they show up in the morning. They actually work because they want to. They work because by working for you, they're doing what's important to them in life. Till next time.